is going to be recorded. So yes, we'll get going now. I'd like to welcome everyone to the Inclusive Trinity Festival bite-sized session on social media accessibility. So my name is Sean Adderley and I'm from the Trinity Inclusive Curriculum Project, and I'm just going to run through really briefly before we start what the Trinity-INC is. So the Trinity Inclusive Curriculum Project, we started in October 2020, and the mandate of Trinity-INC is to embed the principles of diversity, equality and inclusion across all curricula at Trinity College Dublin. Trinity-INC is based in the Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Office, and we also form part of the wider EDI agenda across the college too. This here in blue text is their working definition of what an inclusive curriculum is. So it's one in which all students, regardless of personal circumstances or learning backgrounds, abilities or strategies, have equitable opportunity to engage fully in their studies and achieve their learning goals. So Dr. Rachel Hoare here is the academic project director. She's from the School of Language, Literature and Cultural Studies. Dr. Dorina Johnson is the project manager and also academic lead on the project, who's in attendance today. I'm Sean Adderley, I'm the Student Partner Liaison Officer with the project, so I coordinate the student activities and events, and I'm also the comms officer for the project too. And then we also have Ross Coleman, who's the Trinity-INC graduate intern. Ross also works at promoting accessibility and Blackboard Alloy and stuff around college, and he's supported by the disability service, and Ross is in attendance today as well. So just really briefly, you want to define what we mean by curriculum too, because often it has uncertain boundaries. So we see it as the intended educational experience in the lecture theatre, laboratory or seminar room, plus the hidden curriculum in the library, work placements, etc. So we see it as what is to be learned, which is the content, why it is to be learned, which is the rationale and the underlying philosophy, how it is to be learned, which is the process, and when it is to be learned, which is the structure of that learning process. So it's the whole, we see it as the whole teaching and learning experience. And these are just some contact details as well, if you'd like to get in touch after the session. Dorina, I think we'll put them in the chat for everybody. And please do reach out if you have any questions or thoughts after the session today. So today we're going to be looking at emphasis, color contrast and fonts, PascalCase for hashtags, emojis, voiceovers, alternative text or alt text, and captions or subtitles, as they're known as sometimes too. So just for the first two, I would just like to say that emphasis and color contrast these two specific things can be transferred across the board when it comes to accessibility. So when you're like Microsoft documents and anything else that's kind of produced on technology, emphasis and color contrast and fonts, these things go across the board, so not just for social media. So when it comes to emphasis, well, we say to be bold. So when we usually emphasize words, the common kind of ways of doing it are using underlined, italics, or even highlighting words in color. But the only way to be accessible online is to emphasize using bold, as italics are difficult or impossible to read for visually impaired. Underlined can often be confusing as it represents a link online. And then color cannot be seen by everyone, and it will not be emphasized by a screen reader either. So we just say to be bold if you want to get your point across. Color contrast and fonts then are also very important when it comes to accessibility. So as you can see here on the left hand side, the Trinity Inclusive Curriculum Project written in grey text on the kind of dark navy background. It's very low contrast. It would be very difficult for someone to read, like even myself, I'd struggle to read that. So and then compared to the one at the bottom there, where it has the white text on the navy background, which is pretty high contrast. And it's much more easy to read. And I always just kind of go, my rule of thumb here is that if you're struggling to read the text through the contrast that you're using, then typically it's probably not good contrast. So yeah, so that's the way I'd approach it. If you're struggling with seeing it, then someone else who's either visually impaired or has other maybe another disability probably won't be able to read it at all. When it comes to fonts, so there's fonts called serif fonts, and serif means a decorative stroke at the end of letters. So these little things here at the top of the I and the C, these are inaccessible fonts. So they can cause confusion and just are hard to read for a lot of people. Sans serif fonts are accessible fonts. So sans serif means no decorative strokes on the letter ends. So you just see it here. This is an example. This is a Calibri font, which is a very popular font. Another other popular sans serif fonts would be like Arial. So yeah, so just keep in mind when you're choosing fonts online to choose a sans serif font and not a serif font. Emojis. So emojis can often cause a lot of confusion if they're used incorrectly for screen readers and stuff like that. So for the most part, they're fine to use in social media posts, but just there are a couple of things to keep in mind. So screen readers can identify emojis, but be mindful not to use too many, as it can become very confusing for those using screen readers, as each emoji will be described in detail. So there'll be run-on kind of sentences with the screen reader describing each emoji individually in detail before it goes on to the next word, if there is some text following the emoji. Try and put your emojis at the end of the text in your social media posts to avoid those interruptions within sentences, etc. So there's a couple of things to keep in mind for emojis. So then PascalCase. So this is a very important thing for screen readers too, for hashtags, but it's not only just for screen readers. So if you don't capitalize the first letter of each word, then screen readers read the hashtag as one long word. So often come out as like gibberish basically. And it'd be very understand for someone using screen reader to make sense of the hashtag. But it's also very useful for people that may have dyslexia or other learning difficulties too. But it's also just simply for clarity. As you can see there, like it reads so much easier when each word at the first letter of each word is capitalized. There's an example that was online last year. That Susan Boyle was having an album party, and there was a very unfortunate way that the hashtag read for that. You can look it up afterwards if you want. I'll leave it up to yourselves. So then we're on to voiceover. So including a voiceover in your video is also very important for people who are blind or visually impaired, so they can understand what's happening in your video. But it not only describes the words on the screen, but also physical action, facial expression, and sound effects. So, for example, if there was a video and there was no dialogue and something fell and hit the ground, the voiceover would have to explain what that item was that made the noise, for instance. For text-heavy or animated videos, voiceovers can also really benefit those with dyslexia and other learning difficulties too, just to help things make more sense when there's some audio put onto these things. So now onto alt text. This is one of the most important parts of social media accessibility on Twitter and Instagram, etc. Adding alternative text to your images and to also to your GIFs. I've noticed a lot of Trinity comms departments do like to use GIFs, and yeah, now you can. There is options to add alt text to your GIFs too. So alt text is descriptive text about an image or a GIF, which is posted on social media, on a website, or placed in a document. So alt text is particularly helpful for those who use screen readers, but it is also useful for other purposes, such as placing an image into context. It's also really important for images that do not appear or load on some people's devices. So some people might have a device that maybe can't, it may be like a little outdated or just hasn't got good internet access. They might struggle to download some images, so the alt text will be displayed instead of that, so that way that person then isn't missing out on the image. So I also like to say that there's no right or wrong way to do alt text, but there is good and bad alt text. I was going to say to remember to include as much detail as you can, but it's a little more, I think, a little more nuanced than that, and I'll get into that now in a moment with some examples and stuff. So yeah, so just say what you see when it comes to alt text. I did mention that there's no right or wrong way to do alt text, but there is a wrong way to use the space for alt text. So it's very common for spaces for alt text to be hijacked for the wrong purposes, such as adding copyright to an image, a photographer's name, or hyperlinks to a website. So just remember that alt text spaces are for describing images only. Here it's just a tip that works for me when you're doing alt text. I know it can be very time consuming sometimes, and if you're kind of trying to post things quickly, it can become a bit of an obstacle. So my advice would be that copy and paste is your friend here. So if you similar images on an ongoing, if you're posting similar images on an ongoing basis, or you're simply, you have a certain style that you use recurrently, you use copy and paste to your advantage here, and from old text that you would have used on similar images. But just remember that if there are differences in the images, to make the necessary edits. So this is just an example of a website, a Twitter page that I like called We Rate Dogs. It's very popular, as you're probably familiar with it. And they do really nice alt text on their images. So you see down here in the bottom right here, the image description is a dachshund puppy sits on a concrete floor, nervously chewing his cheek. His eyes are wide, his feet tiny, an enormous tennis ball taller than he is takes up the right half of the photo. So like, just to be pedantic about things, there are other details in this photo. So you could add, on the left there are two toys, one red, one green. In the background, slightly blurry, is a small white railing, and behind this are some chairs with a small white dog who's seen as busy, and the human attendant to the dog. So that's just an example of how you can include other details. But I'm going to get into kind of the more nuances of alt text now in a second. So this is just an example here. Is there anybody who would be willing to give this a go, or does that anybody want to put some alt text into the chat? What do you think that might be useful for this image? And somebody. Any volunteers? Right now. So a tiny blonde pup appears over the top of a laptop, which is open with its screen facing the camera. A time card is open on the screen. The pup has a cute pleading expression, and his two front paws are flopped over the monitor, just so. Sorry. Responding. Sorry, here we go. So this is just another example of, this is an image I took from a Trinity social media page, and I chose this image just purely because it has a combination of text and visual imagery on it. So again, this is a very, very pedantic way of doing alt text, because I'm including as much detail as I can. So on the right hand side is the TCD campanile pointing towards a blue sky, which has a strip of soft white clouds that come up from behind the Graduate Memorials building, which takes up the bottom left of the image. In the top right corner, in some white text, which reads results for undergrad exams available on Friday, 9th September. Below, across the center of the image from the left, it reads, "We wish you good luck." In the bottom corner, then it reads, "Remember to contact your tutor or the senior tutor's office if you need advice." Now, in this example, as I said, I like to include a lot of details, but at the same time, the important pieces of this image it really is just the text. So including the text from this image would be the priority. It is nice to describe the kind of the decorative elements of images, but this, as I said, alt text can be quite time consuming. So if you are in a hurry and you're doing a text or you're doing an image, something like this, just remember to include what the image is trying to communicate. So that in this image is the white text. Yeah, and that just leads me nicely into text heavy images then. So on text heavy images, it's the text information, which is the part of the image that should be prioritized over any decorative elements at all. So in this example here, how to be a trans ally in the classroom, you can see there's a lot of text to be communicated from this image. So if this was shared online, I would recommend that you prioritize the text, and just kind of, if you have to, ignore the decorative elements. Again, here, copy and paste is your friend. If you've created an image on PowerPoint or even on Canva, you can go back and you can copy the text from the original and paste it into the alt text space. Again, if there's too much information, too much text for the alt text space, as Twitter has a character limit where Instagram does not, you can use the comment section. So people, you commonly see people using the comment section for including alt text if they can't fit it all into the character limit that's on Twitter. Again, so just remember, if the text on text heavy images is not included in the alt text, then the person using the screen reader is immediately excluded from that conversation. So just keep that in mind. And this is just like some kind of instructional images to show you how to access that kind of alt text space on Twitter and on Instagram now in a moment. So if you see here just below the image, you have a section which says add description. So if you click on that add description, that will bring you directly to this screen here on the right. And the description box is down here in the blue. An alternative way to get to this description box is through the edit sign in the bottom right of the image. So if you click on that edit sign, it will also bring you to this space where you have an option to crop the image, add alt text, or flag the image. So they're just the two alternative routes to get into the alt text space on Twitter. And it's the same for GIFs as well, just to keep in mind. This is the platform for Instagram on a web browser. So this is how, if you are posting images through Instagram through your web browser, this is how you would access the alt text space here. You just simply click on this accessibility drop down underneath where you'd enter your caption, and it will have your image will be there in a small box, and beside it'll give you space to enter your alt text. Now it's slightly different on your phone, but it's just as straightforward. So you can as I'll mention now, you can go back and edit your images on alt text or images on Instagram and add alt text after you post them, which you can't do on Twitter. So keep that in mind, that if you're posting on Twitter, the alt text needs to be done immediately, whereas on Instagram you can go back and retrofit it to the post. So yeah, and again, just kind of some tips. So if you've used the same image on Twitter, you can copy and paste the alt text from Twitter onto Instagram, which I would regularly do, and I do it in that sequence. I wouldn't do it from Instagram to Twitter, just because Twitter has a character limit, whereas Instagram doesn't. So if you do your alt text on Instagram and transfer it to Twitter, you might run into some issues. Again, just here, so as I mentioned, you can edit your Instagram post. So if you simply click on your phone on the three dots up in the corner and hit edit, it will give you a little option at the bottom corner of your image to enter alt text. So instructional images as well is something else I'd just like to touch on. So the image to the right is an instructional image. So when writing alt text for instructional images, you would describe the process which the image is trying to communicate. So for instance, within this presentation, the images which I've included in it, I have to have alt text written for too. So, but that alt text would look slightly different to the alt text that will be used on social media, because I'm trying to communicate instructions through an image. So just keep that in mind too when you're trying to use an image to show students or staff how to access something, that the alt text must also describe that process. If there's any web authors in attendance today, I'd just like to kind of touch on the new content management system Terminal 4 too. It's very straightforward adding alt text to your images on T4. They provide, when you put your feature image onto your page, you'll be provided with an alternative text box right underneath it. So it's very straightforward. Now, just finally on the captions. So captions are necessary for all videos for people who are hard of hearing or deaf. Captions are also useful for watching videos without sound on in quiet environments. And they're also very useful for people with English as their second languages, as captions can aid in understanding there. Captions on Instagram are very straightforward, and they have a great function, which is, it's, from my experience, it's pretty accurate and reliable. So when you're posting a video, if you click on the little sticker symbol up here and you hit the captions button, it will generate captions automatically for you. And as I said, they're pretty accurate and reliable, even with a heavy Dublin accent, which some aren't. Again, just on Twitter, so there's a way of uploading caption files with a video on Twitter too. Now these caption files have to be, as you can see here, an SRT file. And they need, so they need to be uploaded like simultaneously with the video. But my advice here would be to use YouTube. So you can share your YouTube videos through Twitter, and that you can watch them through the Twitter feed just as like you could watch them on YouTube, and the functions from YouTube work the same. So your captions can be placed on the videos just by simply through that format. So you can kind of you don't have to go through the Twitter avenue of uploading a transcript to Twitter itself if you already have this video on YouTube with captions. So just keep that in mind too. So YouTube will generate captions automatically. And as I mentioned, it's great for being watched within the Twitter feed and threads. However, these ones are generally quite inaccurate and require editing. You know, the way that you can upload a caption transcript to YouTube either with timestamps or without timestamps. But just really briefly, so this is just an example of a transcript with timestamps on the left and one without on the right. So the timestamps are these the numbers over the pieces of text that will be on the screen. So that's the time frame in which that sentence will appear on the screen. I generally like to upload my transcripts to YouTube without any timestamps and give it a day or so to generate the times to sync the captions with the video itself. It's pretty reliable. Sometimes it may take a few hours, sometimes it could take a day. And then I'll go back and I'll do the necessary edits to the transcript, which you just watch the video on 1.5 or 2 times speed, and you can kind of get through it quick enough in doing the edits. And just keep in mind that when you're adding Trinity intro and outro indents to videos too, that can knock transcripts out of sync. So that's usually why I would opt for the transcript with no timestamps, because you have to edit the times by 5 seconds if you have the Trinity indent at the start of the video. So yeah, so I would recommend, if you don't have software good software to do captions, that YouTube is the way to go, and upload your transcripts without timestamps. As I mentioned, there's so many other ways to do captions. It all depends on the software that you have access to. If you have subscriptions to capwing.com or Clip-O-Matic, they're very good platforms for adding captions to videos. And some Trinity departments also have access to Adobe Premiere Pro, which also has a function to add captions to your videos too. But YouTube is free and it does a lot of work for you. You can upload a captions transcript, and within a day or two, the timings will be generated for you. But even beyond that, if you don't have a transcript, YouTube will auto-generate one for you, and you can edit it afterwards. But yeah, just please know YouTube is very useful for captions, but it can sometimes take longer than expected. So just keep that in mind if you are going to use YouTube for captions. So that's it. Any questions or thoughts or anything, please do let me know.
There are a number of questions in the chat there. I know we've got a little bit of time left, so maybe you can answer some of them, and then maybe you could get back to people perhaps on other ones as well. Can you see them there?
Yeah. Is underlying text okay if it is a hyperlink? TNet does not automatically, and I'm sure I can override it. But yeah, if underlying text is fine if it is a link, because it's what it's going to indicate in general. So yeah, that's no problem at all. Would you have any suggestions for cognitive disabilities, such as making it easier for people to complete input fields on a website or entering data into fields? Mark, I don't have any advice on that right now, but I will look into it and I'll come back to you, because that's something that I would like to consider and get my head around too. So thanks for bringing that issue up, and I will follow up with you following this session. So thank you for that, Mark. Very cute dog. It is a very cute dog in the pictures. Are capital letters or punctuation very important in alt text? I would say yes, because the screen reader is sensitive to things like that. So I would make sure like grammar, punctuation and all is kind of you know, pretty straightforward. You know, you capitalize the start of every sentence, and even using PascalCase and hashtags if they're going to be in alt text too is important. As I mentioned, the screen readers are sensitive to them, to different grammatical things. So I just follow the general rules of grammar and punctuation when it comes to alt texts. For photos with a group of say 4 people, should you describe what each person looks like in the alt text or just use their names? Again, here there's no right or wrong way to do this. Like for me, I would probably use their names and any important aspects of the image that the image is trying to communicate to the viewer, I would include. I don't think you need to describe what each person looks like. But yeah, I would definitely mention their names, and maybe you could mention if it's important, if they're staff from certain departments or something like that, you can include those details too. With the T4 feature, image alt text, when you upload a photo to the media library, we are told to include an image description. Would this alt text feature replace the image description? That is a good question. I don't know, Claire. But that's something that I will follow up with the IT about actually, and again I'll follow up with that with you. So Mark and Claire, I will follow up with your questions afterwards. Yeah, so I think that's all the questions addressed in the chat. If anyone else has any questions or thoughts there before we finish up.
Thanks, Sean. Thanks, Dorina. That was great.
Thank you both.
And please do reach out following the session if anything pops into mind for anyone afterwards. Just go ahead. Don't be afraid to drop me an email. Thanks, everybody.